Former President Donald Trump thus closer to locking in the GOP nomination for president. Rumors abound about who his potential running mate might be.
Who would be in the running for vice president?
Well, I can't tell you that, really. I mean, I know who it's going to be.
Give us a hint.
I'll give you, we'll do another show sometime.
Well, what about any of the people who you've run?
Nothing seems to be stopping Donald Trump as he surges toward his third consecutive Republican nomination. The ex-president on Tuesday became the first modern-era non-incumbent Republican to win the first two presidential nominating contests, adding the New Hampshire primary to his Iowa caucus's landslide from last week, and reached the brink of a rematch with President Joe Biden.
Well, I want to thank everybody. This is a fantastic state. This is a great, great state. You know, we won New Hampshire 3 times now, three. We win it every time. We win the primary, we win the generals, we've won it, and it's a very, very special place to me. It's very important. If you remember, in 2016, we came here and we needed that win, and we won by 21 points, and it was great.
Trump has all but cleared the GOP field at an astonishing clip, despite a crush of criminal liability and the memory of his assault on democracy on January 6, 2021. He is consolidating his party around him at a rate unprecedented in modern primary elections. And yet, Trump spent Tuesday night seething, sources told CNN's Caitlin Collins, because his sole remaining GOP rival, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, isn't dropping out.
Had a very good competitor, Ron, as you know, Ron DeSantis. And he fought hard and he fought well, and now we have one left. We started off with, really, if you add some Democrats into it, we started off with 13, and now we're down to 2 people. And I think one person will be gone probably tomorrow. And the other one will be gone in November. You got a lot of Democrats voting for her. You have a crazy election. Let's all get out and let's vote for somebody that we want to run against. They want to run against because she's so easy to beat. If you look at the polls, Biden beats her by a lot. We cannot have that. We're beating Biden by so much, probably get indicted 3 or 4 more times by tomorrow. They're going to indict. They're going to keep indicting, and it keeps driving my numbers up. I can't figure that one out.
Despite failing to land a win against the ex-president in the state perhaps most suited to her candidacy, she insisted she would go on, resisting heavy pressure from Trump's camp to bow out and promising to engage in what looks like an uphill battle in her home state, which holds the next big primary next month. Trump criticized Haley publicly and privately and urged his political aides to up their attacks on her, Collins reported.
With just 3 days to go into the New Hampshire primary, GOP candidates traded insults on the campaign trail. The latest polls show Nikki Haley trailing former President Trump by just 10 points. Leading with a smaller margin than in other states, Trump is increasing attacks on the former UN ambassador, mocking her first name, Nimrata. But Haley is no longer shying away from criticizing her former boss. Firing back today, Haley questioned Trump's electability against Biden and his mental competence.
While his reaction to his New Hampshire win was far less jubilant than his Iowa triumph, the twin victories represent a stunning act of political survival. 3 years ago, Trump left Washington stung by his second impeachment after trying to overturn the result of an election that he lost. There's also a possibility he could be a convicted felon by November's election, given that he's facing 91 criminal charges and more trials, civil and criminal, than can be counted on one hand. His wins underscore his success in leveraging his legal problems to paint a narrative of political persecution that's bolted his political base ever closer to his side.
The one thing Washington cannot forgive is that I put America first, always put America first. I could never help it. I have to do that in order to make America great again. I reject their foolish and disastrous foreign wars, their horrific globalist trade deals, their open border catastrophes, their corruption of our intelligence system, and it's never been more corrupt, and all of the other betrayals of the American people.
And exit polls on Tuesday showing that roughly 8 in 10 of Trump's voters denied the legitimacy of Joe Biden's election in 2020 highlight how Trump has successfully used election denialism as an engine of his political comeback. The former president is in a unique political position. In some senses, he's effectively an incumbent since he never relinquished his hold on the GOP, even after losing. A fate that normally sends ex-presidents into ignominious retirement. But even while in office, Trump never lost sight of his core political formula, his reputation as an insurgent outsider.
Once again, Michigan is going to answer the call of history and show the world that Sleepy Joe Biden, his dark money donors, and his corrupt special interests, and by the way, there's never been anything like this. Anyway, I don't sound like a politician because I'm not a politician. I never wanted to be a politician. I became a politician for one very specific reason, because we're doing a job in the history of our country. In the first 3.5 years, nobody has done what we and this administration has been able to do. With regulations, with taxes, with rebuilding our military, with strengthening our borders. If I don't always play by the rules of Washington and the Washington establishment, it's because I was elected to fight for you, and I fight harder than any president has ever fought before.
So, while Haley is trying to portray him and his stack of endorsements as a figure of the establishment, it's a tactic that works more in theory than practice. In fact, Haley, who is pushing hawkish foreign policies and deficit reduction, is trying to revive the establishment policies of the pre-Trump Republican Party. Trump, who is vowing a second term of retribution, is sending every signal he wants to go back to Washington to tear it all down.
Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight, you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
what?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border, and I want to drill.
That's
drill,
not
drill.
That's not.
No, no.
That's not retribution.
I'm going to be, you know, he keeps, we love this guy. He says, you're not going to be a dictator, are you? I said, no, other than day one.
Unfortunately for Haley, New Hampshire did not, as she told its voters it would, correct the result of last week's Iowa caucuses, where she came a distant third to Trump. Whether she got smoked in the Granite State, as her former opponent, Chris Christie, predicted she would on a hot mic, depends on whose spin you accept. With 88% of the vote in from the primary, Haley trailed Trump by about 11 points. That's short of the huge win some of the ex-president's supporters had expected, but still a handsome victory margin for Trump, even if his problems with suburban voters were reflected in his rival's strong performance in large population areas in southern New Hampshire, a potential alarm bell for his prospects in a general election.
The Associated Press is now calling this race Trump wins the New Hampshire Republican Party. They called it, Joe, at 8:01.
Yeah, not a huge shocker. We certainly had folks expecting an 8:01 call. The AP agreed to wait for all the polls to be closed, but they've been counting votes for an hour now from polls that closed at 7 p.m. here, Kaylee Lyons, and we can make that clear now. The Associated Press has already called the primary for Donald Trump. It brings us to some of the same questions we were already asking, though, Kaylee. While this is a huge headline, certainly for the Trump campaign, what is turnout going to end up looking like? It looks pretty darn massive from what we've been hearing so far today, which could play well for Nikki Haley. And then to that end, what is she going to look like in the so-called strong second that Chris Sununu described to us right here? Yeah,
that's absolutely right. The margin is critical here, and the margin is what we do not know at this point. Right. According to the Associated Press, only 17% of votes have been counted at this point. Trump has 54% of them, Nikki Haley 45%. That is a 9-point spread, but we have a lot of votes that still need to be counted, and it may actually be that margin at the end of the day that decides the trajectory of the Haley campaign moving forward.
The problem for Haley is that as the race now turns toward her home state and big southern state primaries on Super Tuesday in March, she'll be up against Trump in his strongholds, and her chances to pick off wins and convention delegates seem slim. Still, her campaign is arguing that every time she takes on Trump, she is improving, and her supporters insisted that her difficult road ahead did not mean she should be forced out of the race.
And Nikki did a good job. She was okay, but she's not right to be president. I know it very well. Wrong.
the wrong thought process, the wrong policy. And honestly, she's not tough enough. She's not tough enough.
And there's no reason why Haley shouldn't stay in if she has the money. After all, it's a democratic process, and voters, not rival candidates, get to decide the result. Trump's rush to declare victory in the primary race may even be a sign of political malpractice, since he's only leaving Haley and her supporters more determined not to be pushed out. The more she runs, the more support she's getting, said Lisa Kent, a Haley supporter from Connecticut who attended the election watch night party in Concord. It's like an avalanche.
The beauty of the Nikki Haley for President campaign is that it's a national Rorschach blot. If you have any interest at all in the condition of the United States or its future, obviously you are passionately, by definition, opposed to Nikki Haley becoming president because she has no interest in the United States or its future. But if you are completely bought in to the class of people who currently run the country and who are running it into the ground, then you're all in on Nikki Haley because she's, in effect, your puppet. So it's really interesting to see people's reaction to this campaign. And most telling of all, pretty much every permanent fixture in Washington is either supportive of Nikki Haley or isn't saying anything about it. And that brings us to our next guest. He is Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. And as he assessed the presidential race, his reaction was the following. This is a paraphrase, but it's basically what he said. He said, "I'm not exactly sure who I'm for. I know very well who I'm against. I'm against Nikki Haley. So against Nikki Haley that, on principle, not personal, that he announced a new movement called Never Nikki." Here it is.
But unless the former South Carolina governor can pull off a miracle next month in a state where she was elected governor twice, but that is now a Trump bastion, her shaky rationale for continuing her campaign may face a terminal reality. Donald Trump and his allies want to turn the page to the general election. His double-digit win in New Hampshire Tuesday night and his strength in the remaining early states effectively means former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley is running out of options. She'll also have to grapple with the reality that top GOP officials increasingly want the primary to be over.
Look, I think there's two America First candidates in this race since the beginning. That was Donald Trump and myself. I do think we need an outsider, a businessman in the White House, to actually lead as a chief executive. The people of Iowa spoke loud and clear. I got about 8% of the vote. I think it would have been something similar in New Hampshire. I wanted to send that vote Donald Trump's direction because we need an America First leader for this movement. And so that's why I made the decision I did. I'm glad Ron DeSantis made the decision that he did. I think it's time for this primary to be over and to go on to a general, decisive general election victory that's going to be required to reunite this country. And so I felt like I was doing my duty and my part, and I hope that the other candidates now do theirs.
This leaves one major decision left for Trump: selecting a running mate. True, such selections normally occur far later in the calendar season, but the story of this entire primary, besides not being much of a story at all, is how it has thrown out the traditional playbook. There's also some budding pressure for Trump to make his pick so Republicans can turn their focus toward the general election. Trump is no longer the political neophyte he was when he tapped then Indiana Gov. Mike Pence to join him in July 2015. He has strengthened his grip on the GOP after a hostile takeover and the systematic targeting of most of the remaining old guard members.
It wouldn't work if there weren't some truth to it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't work. Yeah, they've seized on her vulnerabilities. You know, she is a neocon. She certainly sounds like a neocon. You know, she keeps saying we need a new generation of change, new generation in the Republican Party. And yes, she's 20 plus years younger than Trump, 25 years younger, maybe even more. But her policies sound an awful lot like George W. Bush's when it comes to, you know, the military and how bellicose she is and when she talks about foreign countries and their threats. And the Republican Party has moved on from that era. I mean, they've tried it. It didn't go well, and they learned. And I don't think there's a big appetite for it. There's a section of the Republican Party, in particular, Jewish Republicans, are much more hawkish than anybody, and for good reason. I mean, look what just happened to Israel and the threats that Jews are under here in America. And I do believe they have a core belief that, you know, peace through strength is the way. But I think a lot of others have just been too burned and they're over that era. And Nikki Haley represents the past to them, not the next generation of leadership.
It doesn't mean this decision will be easier. Pence has described how Trump endangered his family on January 6, 2021, as then-president continued to lash out at the nation's number 2, even as rioters stormed the Capitol. There's a long history of presidential neglect and disrespect toward the vice presidency. John Nance Garner, FDR's first VP, famously deemed the post a warm bucket of spit. Needless to say, Trump's treatment of Pence before and during the Capitol riot vastly exceeds any of that. Then again, many Republicans who expressed outrage during the siege of the U.S. Capitol have later come around to endorsing Trump, and in the modern era, there are few greater perches to launch or relaunch your national ambitions than to be the highest-ranking apprentice. Haley, who has remained clear her campaign will continue, has repeatedly said she's not interested in being anyone's vice president.
What's the plan from there?
I mean, go and make sure that we are doing strong in South Carolina. This is just about building. Our goal is to make today better than yesterday. That's it. So strong in Iowa, strong in New Hampshire, strong in South Carolina, and keep it going from there. And we think that's going to happen.
I understand we've seen, as we talk to people around Iowa, the enthusiasm among a professional class, establishment, you might say Republicans. How do you draw over, and that's, establishment Republicans, working class, professional Republicans, enough for second place in Iowa for sure, or in New Hampshire, or Hampshire win. How do you pull over working class Republican Trump voters?
I mean, right now our focus is to try and win everybody, not a certain group, not a certain anything. I mean, Republicans have lost the last 7 out of 8 popular votes for president. I've said this over and over again. That's nothing to be proud of. We should want to win the majority of Americans. The only way you win the majority of Americans is if you have a new generational leader. 75% of Americans don't want a Trump-Biden rematch. They've made that very clear. What we're saying is we're going to go in with new solutions. Leave the negativity, leave the baggage of the past, leave the old names of the past, and let's go forward. That's what Americans want. They want that for their kids. They want that for themselves. They're tired of the chaos.
Trump's choice of Mike Pence illustrates that he could tap someone to unite the party, but it's clear the former president is nowhere near happy with how that marriage ended. Haley's biggest strength would be her effort to appeal to independent voters. She could also hopefully repair Trump's long-running struggles in the nation's suburbs. It's clear, though, that her decision to keep campaigning is starting to grate on Trump. The 58-year-old three-term senator endorsed Trump shortly before the New Hampshire primary. The South Carolinian also largely avoided criticizing Trump in a way that may have foreclosed him being on the ticket. Polls showed GOP primary voters liked Scott almost as much as his Senate Republican colleagues. It's worth noting that while the former president has a growing list of congressional allies, the Senate has repeatedly been an issue for him. Trump and his allies spent over a year ruthlessly attacking DeSantis. It was only toward the end of his disappointing primary that the 45-year-old began to return fire. DeSantis did endorse Trump immediately after dropping out before New Hampshire. But the question remains if either side would want to repair their political alliance.
Campaign, and now there are less candidates involved, including former Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who has dropped out, suspending his campaign, throwing his support behind the former president. I do want to put up this post that is just coming into our newsroom here on Live Now from Fox moments ago, as he says, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that counts." That a quote there from Winston Churchill. But major breaking news, Ron DeSantis is out. Of course, the front runner, former President Donald Trump there, beating him and Nikki Haley by some 30 points in the Iowa caucus. This comes just days ahead of the New Hampshire primary as well. Let's listen into just the statement on social media from Ron DeSantis as he suspends his presidential bid.
He has also endorsed conservative policies like a 6-week abortion ban that would cause major headaches in a general election. Despite having just been elected to the U.S. Senate last year, Vance has repeatedly been floated as a vice presidential candidate for Trump. And he's not saying no. "Certainly, if the president asked, I would have to think about it," Vance recently said while stumping for Trump in New Hampshire. Though he also said that the best place for me is to remain in the U.S. Senate. A former venture capitalist and the author of the best-selling book Hillbilly Elegy, Vance was once a never-Trumper and a fierce critic of the former president. But he has since morphed into one of his staunchest acolytes in the Senate, and he's at the vanguard of a movement that seeks to reorient the party more towards the working class. the chairwoman of the House GOP conference. Stefanik is the highest-ranking official who is seen as a potential Trump pick. The New York Congresswoman, who ascended to her leadership position on the heels of Liz Cheney's ouster, has notably undergone a sharp shift when it comes to Trump, beginning with the 2019 impeachment hearings. Trump has reportedly described Stefanik as a killer and a potential pick in private, and the Congresswoman recently said she would be honored to serve in any capacity in a Trump administration.
Before I let you go, I have to talk to you about your future. Former President Trump, in his interview with me, said he, quote, likes the concept of picking a woman as his vice president. If called upon, would you serve as his vice president?
Well, I, of course, would be honored to serve in any capacity in a Trump administration. I'm proud to be the first member of Congress to endorse his re-election. I'm proud to be a strong supporter of President Trump, and he's going to win this November.
Have you spoken to the former president about the possibility of running as his VP pick?
I'm not going to get into the content of my conversation with President Trump. I talk to him frequently. We've been focused on winning. There's so much work to do as the House Republican Conference Chair, as the representative for New York's 21st Congressional District, and we need to make sure that President Trump is in the strongest position to win in the general election. That's what I've been focused on, and that's what I'm going to remain focused on.
Just to put a very fine point on it, it sounds like you're saying if he were to ask you, the answer would be yes?
Well, I've said for a year now I'd be honored to serve in the next Trump administration, but I'm focused on doing my job right now, which is a really important role as the conference chair and as, most importantly, the representative for the people of New York 21.
Like some other candidates on this list, Ramaswamy is unlikely to be chosen as Trump's next VP. But that doesn't mean there aren't people out there who would like to see it. Ramaswamy was perhaps the only candidate in the race who never dared to issue substantive criticisms of Trump, choosing instead to run as a staunch supporter of the former president who would carry that mantle forward. He dropped out immediately after coming in fourth in Iowa, endorsing Trump and likely securing himself some sort of future position in MAGA world, if not Trump's actual cabinet. But while Ramaswamy would be popular with some of Trump's most devoted followers, his penchant for conspiracy theorizing would likely be a liability in a general election.
Let's do this, guys. It's good to see you. It's good to be back to New Hampshire. We miss you guys. We're going to make this happen, and you guys know this well. You know this man. You know why we're here, patriots across the state. Between those of us who love the United States of America and a fringe minority who hates this country and what we stand for. And right now we need a commander-in-chief who will lead us to victory.
Trump is getting closer and closer to his victory. I am more than confident that he will become president, and we will see great changes in our great country. Don't forget to write your opinion in the comments and watch other disturbing news on the channel.